our next guest has a couple of questions on El Salvador's, or a couple of opinions rather, on El Salvador's Bitcoin bill. She's a financial writer, blogger, and author of The Case for People's QE. Joining us now to discuss is Francis Coppola. Welcome, Francis, to this show. So you've argued that making Bitcoin legal tender will be good for El Salvador, and they just announced the date for the law that comes to effect. Everyone gets $30 in Bitcoin. Do you see this working out, or do you foresee challenges ahead?
I don't want to give the impression that this is some kind of free ride, easy ride for them. It won't be. There are some potential benefits from using Bitcoin in El Salvador. Particularly, there's the opportunity to attract inward investment in Bitcoin. There's the opportunity to develop Bitcoin-based businesses. And all of that would help to develop El Salvador as an exporting nation and improve its GDP. And in the long run, that would be good for El Salvador. But in the shorter run, there are immense risks with this because El Salvador is a dollarized economy. It uses the dollar as its national currency, which is, of course, a currency it doesn't control, it doesn't print, and it has to earn or borrow that money externally. This move with Bitcoin doesn't earn it any dollars. It's quite low nationally on its dollar supply, and they were going into negotiations with the IMF to borrow some dollars. And moving to a partially Bitcoin-based economy where part of their reserves will be in Bitcoin and where people will be using Bitcoin actually reduces the supply of dollars in the economy. So there are huge risks. There is a real risk that and I'm not quite sure we're going to deal with that.
Good morning. There's also this larger tension here, kind of just about like the whole philosophy of Bitcoin. So, a few of the common criticisms that are coming up is one, this idea that Bitcoin is going to be made to a certain degree compulsory, just in the sense that merchants have to accept it. Another common criticism is that, as you know, the leader of El Salvador has been criticized for showing authoritarian tendencies. And, this is just kind of going to strengthen the government. And then, as we were just mentioning in the intro of the show, we don't have very much information about this, but like this idea that, citizens have to go through facial recognition technology in order to access this $30 of Bitcoin. How concerned are you about this idea that, Bitcoin is actually going to strengthen a government that may not have the most, freedom embracing views at heart?
I must admit, I am concerned about that because it seems to me that some aspects of this scheme, this move, actually do lean towards a more authoritarian agenda. You've already mentioned the facial recognition technology to get this airdrop of $30 worth of Bitcoin. So the call on merchants to accept it. Now, no legal tender legislation in the world compels merchants to accept the currency. Legal tender has a specific meaning, which means it must be used in settlements of debts which are disputed and have gone through the courts. It's never you must use this currency, but in El Salvador it will be you must accept this currency, and then the SOP for that is this, but you can instantly then exchange it for dollars. But it's relatively small. They've got available for exchanging it to dollars. They've got 150 million. How far is that going to go if every merchant in El Salvador opts to exchange their Bitcoin for dollars all the time? So I'm concerned that they may not be able to guarantee that exchange, and that the coercive elements could mean that in a way people are forced to use a currency that they may not want to use.
Francis, I do want to get to your discussion about titanium and iron in a second, but I do want to ask, why would El Salvador compel merchants to accept Bitcoin? Is there any specific reason you think El Salvador, that Bukele would ask people to do that?
There are a number of reasons why they might. I mean, the first is actually to force people to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange rather than just receiving remittances in it and then immediately converting them into physical dollars. It's worth remembering that 70% of El Salvador's population currently transact exclusively in physical dollars, no actual physical cash. And, there are advantages to try to move people off physically into a way of transacting. So, that could be a way of encouraging people to use Bitcoin for transactions, to use digital transactions rather than physical cash. So that might be one reason.
So getting to your discussion about titanium and iron, you've likened it to the Weimar Republic's printing of Reichsmarks during the reparations period, when they had to make reparations under the Versailles Treaty. We now see things like Tether, which also it's not 100% backed by US dollars, but by floating assets such as commercial paper, which, although people claim that they're as good as dollars, in fact, they are market rate, if they're to believe, they nonetheless are priced by the market and not one for one with the US dollar. Do you see any parallel between what happened with iron and titanium last week, where there was a run on the bank, and what's happening now with Tether in terms of it's not being backed by US dollars? We had Sam Bankman-Fried from FTX yesterday say he's not particularly concerned with it, and has actually said that DAI is more risky than Tether. Do you agree with that assertion, or is there something to be concerned about with Tether?
Broadly, actually, I do agree with that assertion. I think algorithmic stablecoins like DAI and certainly iron and titanium are hugely risky things. They rely on this algorithmic stabilization mechanism, which works as long as everybody does what they expect them to. But if somebody then decides to do something else, like launch a speculative attack, which is what happened with iron and Titan, then the outcome can be very different. Now, Tether's actually got some things in place to stop that happening. So, for example, rather like a money market fund, it can delay redemptions. It can redeem in what it calls in kind, which would mean that rather than being given dollars, you would be most likely given a token, rather similar to what Bitfinex did back in 2016, where it seized a load of its customers' deposits and gave them Bitfinex tokens instead. And all of that would tend to make it more difficult for a run on Tether itself to gain traction. What I think would be more likely would be a run on the exchanges, which might force them to suspend trading in Tether and in pairs using Tether. That, I think, would be more likely how it would play out.